Okay, thank you. Okay, today's topic, the immigrant experience through Castle Garden and Ellis Island. This narrated slideshow will help you to imagine your ancestors walking in the footsteps of those illustrated and photographed, and to further appreciate the sacrifices they made to enable us all to be American citizens when we were born. Our presenter, Paula Seeger, has been a member of Eastside Genealogical Society for several years and is a member of the Tacoma Pierce County Genealogical Society, where she currently lives. Her memberships in historical societies in Minnesota and Iowa continue to provide her with background information about where her great-grandparents lived. She's not an expert on Castle Garden, Ellis Island, or the immigration laws, so she decided to do some research on the topics to further understand how her ancestors traveled here from Norway, Ireland, Germany, and England. And now, Paula, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, as I suggested to Dorothy, and she reminded everyone, I'm not an expert, obviously, even at Zooming. So here we go. As she said, I wanted to learn more about this for my own purpose, and I found some photos and information that I just wanted to share with everyone else. So here we go, even though I don't have good Zoom experience. So the immigrant experience through Castle Garden and Ellis Island. I loved these photos, the combinations of the illustration and photo to get an idea of what it used to look like. And as Dorothy indicated, I've just pulled this together from things I've researched to be able to share it with everyone here. My disclaimer. So I have German ancestors on 4 different lines of my 8 that came here from 1846 to 92. My Norwegian people came from 1860 to 1870. I have 1 Irish line that came here somewhere before 1793. And my English ancestors came somewhere in around 1646. And of course, they used a variety of ports. I have never visited Ellis Island, either as a tourist, as a researcher. So I've just been doing this part from the internet research. So I have found multiple websites that I got all these fabulous photos from and hope that you will enjoy them. And my goal is that by looking at these illustrations and photos and information, it's going to open dialogue in our chat room later on where everybody can discuss this.
I've asked a separate question that he's asking when you're rephrasing. So I'm going to ask for answer full.
And would someone like to cut off their microphone? That would probably be helpful. Thank you. So I'm providing different websites as I go to show where I got the references from. So as an overview, Castle Garden opened up as a resort in 1824. Then it actually started as the immigrant landing depot in 1855. We're going to look at a lot of illustrations of Castle Garden. There's like 1 photo. The rest of them are illustrations. So in 1890, the federal government took control of the immigration process, and Castle Garden was closed. They used Battery Park as part of the processing center before they got into Ellis Island, which opened up in 1892. So we'll see a lot of photographs of Ellis Island showing the specific immigrants and the experiences that they went through. And obviously Ellis Island stopped processing immigration in the 20s, but it was actually in 54 when it was stopped totally being used and then turned into a more of a tourist site and a reference site. So you'll see a lot of illustrations and photographs. I strongly recommend that you look at the handouts later on that cover the timeline history of Ellis Island and also the immigration laws, and that you maybe take some notes about what really impacted you or touched you during this presentation, so that when we're in the chat room, you can talk about how this may have impacted your people. So here's a list of the major ports of immigration and also some of the minor ports. And just because we are the German group, I got a couple of pieces of information to share that basically Germans typically came here. The push factors of the reasons why they came was because of the lack of farm ownership opportunities. Sometimes it was persecution, sometimes military reasons. But obviously it was because they were hoping for better economic opportunities. the kinds of jobs, I found a little snippet from Wikipedia as to the types of jobs that people typically came with those skills. And the most common ancestors, I thought it was interesting because Becker and Wagner, the two last ones, were actually part of my history as well. This was an interesting document that I found that showed the number of immigrants from the different countries. So according to this, which was not put out until 2016, it showed that there were 564,000 immigrants that came in just from Germany. But then of course, there's other countries that were not that geographically far from there where others came as well. So there are a lot of photos and illustrations you'll be seeing, and you'll be seeing a code number at the bottom, either Library of Congress, LOC, or you'll see GGA. And the GGA refers to a website that it's a Norwegian website that shows all of these pictures. They pulled them all together. And basically it is the Genvik or Janvik are the pronunciations for the archives. So this was the first photo that I was able to find from 1850, the illustration, I should say, from 1850 that showed what Castle Garden looked like at the start. It was used initially as a resort, which is why that large interior room, you'll see pictures of that later on, but why this large interior room is just so gorgeous. But it was sold by Mr. Ellis's family to New York, and then it was used as an immigration center. It's just interesting, I think, to see all the different illustrations from the time of the different areas. So of course the signs, it appears, were in English. I'm assuming they were all in English. Not necessarily that people were going to be able to read them in English, but that's the way they were. This is the hospital that they had on Ellis Island, part of what they used to help treat so many people. I thought it was very interesting to see all the animals out there to create some of their own food for the people that they were feeding. This is the one and only photograph that I was able to find of Castle Garden. So again, this was what some of our ancestors may have seen as they entered. We can see more pictures of this later on when we're talking about Ellis Island, but the same process happened where the ships would be in the bay, and then they would take a ferry out to the ship and then bring the ferries into the facilities so that people would land right there. So this one is actually in 1880, so it's a nice earlier one. Again, a nice picture of what Castle Garden actually looked like and the Battery area. I loved this picture because it shows the other ships out in the distance. One of the things that I read was that when people were coming to the United States, in about 18 or 19 nautical miles out to sea, they would actually see the light from a lighthouse that was built in 1797. So that would be their first clue of we're getting close, we're getting close. And of course, they didn't see the Statue of Liberty until like 1886 when that was provided and installed. I think this is the last view we have of Castle Garden. So what we're going to do is I'm going to kind of split up all these pictures and illustrations into different categories. So initially when someone would come, they would get unloaded, onto the ferries, and then at the wharf, then they would be examined by officials. So it'll give you a better idea of what the location looked like, the massive amount of people coming through. And then when they actually registered, so they would look at the ship's registration forms and bring them forth in groups and call them off to make sure that everybody was there, keep track of people, answer questions. Then there was the physical inspection. The photos for Ellis Island are much more clear than this. Here it just appears they're asking them questions, but in the ones for Ellis Island, we'll have much more pictures to show about this. One of the things that I read was that the first class cabin passengers would often be just briefly checked by the inspectors who would actually come out to the ship. And it was only the people that were not in, the people that were in steerage they were the ones who actually had to go through the whole process of the inspection. In both Castle Garden and Ellis Island, there was always some type of a board where they could plead their case if they didn't have the right documentation or whatever. There was always an opportunity for them to try to prove why they should be able to become a citizen. They typically had runners to help move groups of people throughout the facility, and they typically had translators available to help people who didn't speak enough English. There was always inspection of the baggage in both facilities of things that they couldn't bring along with them that they brought illegally. Some people were, in this case, it appears to me as though she was smuggling like lace. So I'm not quite certain. I never was able to find like what were the things that were removed from people or what was illegal to bring in at that time. But obviously they were being searched. And here's a room full of seized gardens at Castle Garden. So these are all the things that we're not going to be able to bring through. I noticed a lot of the trunks are the camelback trunks, which I think my history has always taught me that those were people with more money had a camelback trunk because they had to sit at the top of the pile. They weren't the rectangular ones. So those were people that had more money or spent more money. I thought this was just sweet. This is their first Thanksgiving dinner, an illustration of, you know, what little they had left after eating on board the ship all this time. And now this is their first major meal here in the United States on the island. There were people that, of course, met on the ship. There were people that met at Castle Garden. And I've also read that men would sometimes come there to meet up with someone who they had communicated with. And so they would actually get married on site. So the daily life at Castle Garden, things that happened every day. So this is the interior of the facility that you saw earlier, when the big domed building. This is what the interior looked like. So that would have really been impressive to someone who came from another country potentially. As I indicated earlier, they had immigrant runners so that they would move groups of people from one area to the next. I thought this was a nice exterior illustration of just people having to get out in the sun, being on land, happy to be off the ship after the length of time that they traveled. And just people milling about in the interior of the buildings. Very rough interior in some of these areas. So as they prepared to leave Castle Garden and get ready for their future adventures, they would have to exchange their currency. Of course, there might have been situations where the currency was not exchanged at the appropriate rate. And of course, it could have always been just dollar for dollar, so to speak. I liked this illustration because it really shows, you know, how much stuff you're carrying. A lot of people probably did not trust any porters, and it's like, no, I will carry it myself, thank you. But then they had to struggle with all of these large packages. And again, just wrapped up their things in a blanket or a towel, you know, a blanket or a sheet or something, and rope rather than having an actual suitcase. Of course, they had to have a railroad ticket to be able to get somewhere. Sometimes on the ships, the whole entire transportation would be included in the original cost, and other times they would have to purchase that once they got here. So think of buying your railroad ticket and not being able to speak the language clearly, and watching your possessions and watching your children, and just found that to be a very interesting scene. When I first saw this, it made me snicker about when we go cruising and picking up our luggage and getting our luggage from the large areas. Can you imagine trying to find your luggage in amongst everything else if you're not physically carrying everything you own to pick up your larger trunks or packages in this setting? Then they would load them up. Anybody that was going to the railroad to get on the railways, they would load them up and park them away that way. Sometimes your families would meet them directly. Speaking of which, the lovely scene of meeting family members that have been waiting. A lot of people would also just stay locally in New York, and the boarding rooms were tended, from what I've read, to be pretty rundown because by that point people hardly had any money left, and so they had to take what they could for housing and try and find a job. So if you didn't have someone already meeting you to pick you up, or you didn't already have a train ticket to go somewhere else, then that was typically the option. Another thing I've read a lot about in different situations was that prior immigrants would oftentimes take advantage of immigrants because, well, here, I'll haul this for you. You pay me this much and I'll haul this to your boarding room, and then they'd never be seen from again. So those kinds of situations obviously would happen, as well as well-meaning citizens helping out. An illustration at a railway station. This I will read because it's too small for you to see. Where the blame lies. This cartoon shows a man holding a top hat in one hand and gesturing toward a horde of arriving immigrants. And the immigrants are labeled German socialist, Russian anarchist, Polish vagabond, Italian brigand, English convict, Irish pauper, etc. So a scowling Uncle Sam leans against the building, and at his feet is a sheet of paper which is written, Mafia in New Orleans, anarchists in Chicago, socialists in New York. And the man, who's the judge, says to Uncle Sam, if immigration was properly restricted, you would no longer be troubled with anarchy, socialism, mafia, and such evil kindreds. I thought that was really interesting given all the situations we're going through today. So there was a period of time when Castle Garden was used. It started in 1855, and there was about 8 million people that passed through it during the next 35 years. And during the period of time that Ellis Island was being created, they used the barge office at the Battery as the immigration port. And they used it again at a later point when Ellis Island actually had a fire. So the barge office was used from 1890 to 1891, and again from 1897 to 1900. So moving on to Ellis Island, this is a little bit covering the boarding of the ship and the life on the ship. So I think this is one picture that many of us have seen in articles and newspapers and journals throughout our life, but just the crowded atmosphere and situation on a ship. Some of that was because of just being able to get out in the fresh air, getting the sun, and just the steerage people where they didn't have cabins. So obviously, as it says here, there's no barriers that exist, and the introductions are neither possible nor necessary. Again, steerage passengers, all the possessions that they have, having to watch over them, and yet at the same time being very happy to be out in fresh air. This looks like it's right before they're getting ready to land, so they're all crowded and ready to go. There's a few slides here of this one particular ship, them people boarding the ship. I thought this was interesting because it shows the kitchen. Can you imagine trying to cook huge pots of soup to feed people on the ship, and how to keep that safe? I don't see any rails holding the pots in place. This was an example of the women's quarters, so sleeping on the ships. Notice there's light coming in at the top from the windows so that it's not totally dark in there. Somehow, I don't think every man got their own hammock. The mats in the back look like a lot of people slept on the floor as well. This is totally impossible to read, but I've read it before, so I'll explain it to you again. In the left picture, it's the bathroom. So basically, once they were on board, they would, to disinfect the board, the immigrant would be shown into the bathroom where they would be thoroughly washed. In the center view is the cylinder. They'd open up this cylinder and they'd pull this cart out, and all the immigrants' clothing and bed linen would be tied up and labeled. They would put it all in there after the immigrant, of course, had been stripped down to their basic clothing. and the bundle would go in, and then they would place the tag that was on the bundle. They would give the same tag to the immigrant and put it around their neck. In the far right screen, that shows that the cylinders were then closed, and then the engineer would turn on the vapors that included sulfur, formaldehyde, and steam to be able to clean all of their and disinfect all of their clothing. This and the following slide I thought were so sweet. It's apparently at some point there was a boatload of 1,000 marriageable girls that came. So they were, looking down to see, who is the man that's waiting for me? Who am I going to meet? But this one just tugged at my heart. Probably this woman is a widow, I'm guessing, and this little girl is saying, who's going to be my daddy? Who am I going to be living with? Where are we going? What's it going to be like? Just all the excitement that they went through. So here's the first views that they had of Ellis Island. So when they're out on the ship and they're bringing the ferry in, this would be how they would have seen the barge office. So again, looking from the ship as they're from the ferry as they're coming in. Again, this slide is a little small in the photos, but it does show on the top is the hospital building. The middle one shows where anybody who had a disease, they were going to be moved into that area. And then this other island is where anyone with diseases, and also the last building was the creek. And later on, I have some statistics about the people that died, the children that were born there in Ellis Island, and the people that died there. Just a picture of the quarantine station, the places where the doctors would wait. They get their 2 whistles from the incoming steamer, and they go out in a small ferry and inspect people on board. So this is when the ferries are meeting up with the ships so the doctors could board and do their examinations. A nice aerial view from the 1900s of what Ellis Island looked like. Again, another picture of the breakwater where they're coming in. So after you get off the ship and you get on the ferry, after you get off the ferry, then you've got to start walking through the buildings to get to where the inspectors are. So you can see carrying a lot of your own personal things versus having a porter move it would have been quite a bit of work. No rolling luggage like we have these days. So this is a little bit later than their prior view. This one is from 1915. Ellis Island started out as being 3 acres and it ended up being 27 acres in the end. And they built it by using the landfill from the ship's ballast and excavated materials when they built the New York subway. So that's what allowed them to expand all the space. So docking and entering. Again, here's another ferry loaded with people to come in. Carrying all your luggage. I liked this slide because the woman in the front with this beautiful hat and probably a veil, it looks like, over her face, all dressed up with her nicest clothes on, and the woman behind her is just covered with probably as many clothes as she could carry on her body, so she didn't have to carry it in her luggage. This young immigrant woman receives the bad news about her husband-to-be. The telegram from the West says he's dead, so she has to go back. So basically, when women were alone, they had to have a telegram and or a ticket to ensure that and document where they were going, or they would not be allowed to continue. So if the husband died in the ship on the way there, or if they didn't meet them like they were supposed to, the women would be sent back. So in this case, this immigrant family comes to America to find the father, and he's run away with another woman. So now the family's got to go back. Look at that family size, and to think that she's probably spent every penny they had to get here, and now they've got to go back. This woman was being betrayed by her lover. So again, they're going to have to figure out what's going to happen with her, and probably she'll end up going back. So here's the examination by the officials. So it starts out, one of the things that they did at some point was they made people read from the Bible in their own language. Not because, I'll read the quote, not because it's considered a sacred to many people, because it's now the only book that virtually everybody, it's in every tongue. So they had them read from the Bible to be able to see if they were able to read in their own language. So this is what some of the, what would await many of the people when they would come in. A lot of bars, actually referred to them as pens in some areas, and we'll see quite a few of those pictures in the future. So again, immigrants waiting to come in to be examined. And here's a photo of some of the examiners. So there'll be these rails where people have to walk between. They bring them in groups based on what the ship's registration forms were. So if there's 30 people on a page, well, then the next 30 people come in. So they get called in by that so they can trace them. Some of these photographs obviously are in better shape than others, but certainly you can see the large ship's manifest that he's working off of, and assuming the employee with the hat is either a translator or another staff member. This shows a picture of the inspections of even their luggage. And in this case, this person's luggage is being pulled because he has sweet potatoes, rose bushes, plants, things that are not allowed to come in. Again, immigrants passing by inspectors. So again, you can see a lot of the piping, the cattle guards basically is what they're referred to, they're pens, where they would put different groups of people as they would come through. Another view of the registration desk. And this reminded me of being on a cruise ship and standing in this large room where you stand with your luggage and go through all this paperwork. I found this one very interesting because look at those large ship manifests. So when we see them, no wonder they're so tiny when they've been scanned, and they were just huge. So they obviously had these large stations, workstations to support the paperwork that they would get from the ship's manifest. Again, moving people through as they get all of their documents examined at different stations. Here is one of the large buildings in the interior and in the main building, and you can see the different, what they refer to as the pens, where different groups of people that have been processed go to different areas. Not very welcoming. So they actually do, as I said, refer to them as immigrant pens. And they're sitting in the pens are numbered similar to the number that the individuals are wearing. All immigrants are invoiced on a bill of lading comprising 30 persons. Each immigrant has a ticket, the number of which corresponds to that of the bill of lading and also corresponds to the number on the pen where they wait for further examination. This individual is having a private examination. I would assume the person in the left is maybe the doctor or the psychiatrist or someone doing the examination, and the other two are just the officials making sure that things are running according to plan. So at some point too, even when they are passed, then they still wait for other people or for other individuals. And it says here that they are separated by their language skills. The medical exams. So one of the things I found was the vaccination card that someone would have to prove that they actually were vaccinated, and they would want to keep that on them so that they had that to show that they were healthy. Another inspection card. So you can see how some of the paperwork, those were the only two pieces of paperwork I was able to find in the sources I was looking at. This individual is being tested to measure her ability to place different shapes of blocks in the proper places and the timing of that, so that they could see whether or not, even if she didn't speak English, whether or not she was of sound mind and could rationalize or calculate things. These people are waiting for their second mental inspection in the weeding out process. And this photograph was really interesting because here this woman on the right is being examined after she first arrives, and there's other women in the background also being examined. But later on, after 3 or 4 examinations, a week later, they find basically that she's feeble-minded, so she's not allowed in. The physical exam, I did not find any pictures of women being examined physically to this extent, but here's an example of some men being examined for skin problems. Notice the eye chart up on the wall is in Hebrew. This was another illustration of a medical exam. So it's rather interesting. So far, I've only been able to see male examiners. I didn't ever see any photos of any female examiners. So that's probably why they weren't undressing. This was probably the most scary time for most individuals, from what I've read, is because of eye diseases, they would oftentimes use this button hook to pull the eyelid back to check for whether or not they had an eye issue. So here they are it appears as though they're just using their hands. Can you imagine how unsanitary that was to be checking everyone? And, you know, now, especially now these days, we're so concerned about how clean our hands are and wearing rubber gloves and everything. This one obviously is more follow my eye with my hand with your eye to see if he can pass the exam. I would imagine that not all of the hospital wards looked quite this nice, but this is the men's ward in 1902. It says that infectious diseases were treated free of charge until good health makes them eligible for entrance into the United States. And again, it looks awfully clean and neat and tidy, if you ask me. I think someone knew that the photographer was coming that day, in my opinion. This is a photo, the only photo I was able to find of what the operating room would look like. This is not possible for you to read, I realize, but I will go over it because it was the only thing that I found from 1917. It'll kind of give you a perspective. So June, July, and August, there were over 30,000 people that were inspected on the lines. 3,000 of them got a check mark on them, or a circle with a check mark that they needed to be inspected further. 2,400 of them got liberated after that. They were able to be let go. 610 were given the hold cards and detained. 70 were determined to be feeble-minded. 1 was an imbecile and 1 was epileptic. So those were the ones then, obviously, they were certified on the line to have problems, and they were the ones that were sent back. The ones on hold were the ones that were detained and evaluated further. So the Board of Inquiry, as we saw in Castle Garden, they also had it at Ellis Island. And basically, it was a group of men who would question the immigrant. I found it interesting to read some of the things that were actually asked of them. It said the officials went through a list of around 30 questions in a couple of minutes. What's your name? Which ship were you on? What's your nationality? Where did you come from? Where are you going? What's your marital status? Are you a polygamist? Do you have any education? Do you speak English? Do you read and write your own language? What was your occupation? Do you have any skills? Who paid your ticket? How much money do you have? Are you suffering from any special diseases? And then later on, apparently they added other questions like, what's your political convictions? Are you an anarchist? And have you ever been in prison? So I thought that was interesting that they were running them through those types of questions. Additional photo of the same type of thing. Somebody appearing before the Board of Inquiry. I'm assuming that maybe the person in the back corner or the man sitting on the far right is potentially the translator. Again, different pictures of the boards. It does say in every circumstance, they're weighed carefully, and if possible, the immigrant is admitted. Food. How did you feed all those people? So one of the things they had was a bread station where they could just buy bread or get bread. This is an example from the early 1900s where individuals would be able to sit down and actually have a meal. 1902, a dining room photo. So quite basic, and obviously with the bowl, everybody just got soup. I thought this was interesting since my father was a farmer. They used a milk can to take water out on the outside at Ellis Island. And I'm thinking, sitting in the sun in the middle of the afternoon, how many people are drinking out of that, and how warm is that water? Not probably very healthy either, but I just found that it is an interesting photo. Another shot of the eating environment in the dining room. This one probably is a little bit more realistic. It says it's their first meal. The large white tiled dining room at Ellis Island is typical of the whole smooth running regime. Here, good, nourishing, appetizing food helps along with a favorable impression of the newcomers. Well, it may not have been all that appetizing to some people, or depending on their taste. So again, daily life at Ellis Island. We've got some nice photos of that. So obviously kind of a little bit of mass pandemonium at some point when there's so many people in such a small space, children trying to play, move around, everybody maintaining their possessions. There's clothing hanging up in the back. I don't know if they're drying it or what they're using that for, but there's some clothing hanging up. Lots of people, lots of lines. Apparently this boy was asked to take the loaf of bread out of his pocket, and he said, no, I came to this country for bread. So this Italian immigrant was not willing to give up his loaf of bread. Again, once they're at Ellis Island, being able to be outside in the sun, but look at the close quarters of just the park benches. And then people who I've just got to be outside. I don't care. I'll sit on the lawn, just anything, just get me out. This was interesting for me, and I'll read some of it because it shows once people actually get to New York and they get a job and they stay there, the Department of Interior was requesting or requiring organizations to provide education. So this picture shows a big school in an industrial area where the teachers on the far right have the blackboards, and then they're talking in the native language to the foreigners to help them understand what's going on in the United States and what's expected of them. This one I had to show you because it was just so sad to see everything this woman possessed. She had to carry it by herself any way possible. As I said earlier, no rolling suitcases for them. When they're on Ellis Island, looking back at the mainland and wondering, when am I going to get out of here, and how long is it going to take, and are they going to welcome me, and where am I going to live, and where am I going to go? That must have been on their minds. There's always children to play. They have to have some space to do that. They did have some educational opportunities for children and play areas. So up on the top of the building, there was an open area where matrons would take children. I have 2 slides of large families. This is a Dutch mother with 11 children, and they're moving to Minnesota, but they've got their little tags on with their who they are and where they're going. But can you imagine trying to manage that number of children and all their luggage by yourself? And here was another large family, but also a little bit older, so they could obviously help out. But I just thought that was really interesting to see such large families coming. And certainly every 1 or 2 years, there's another child being born. Although there looks to be an age difference between the boys and the girls. I was surprised. In 1920, at some point, there was a piano available for them. So this family was passing their time by playing and singing. Kids playing, again, probably up on the garden, the garden roof where they're able to play. And another matron with children up on the roof. Where they're actually able, when the families are there for any length of time, then they actually spend time trying to educate the children. This is a Catholic Mass at Ellis Island. So they were able to have mass in large groups. Apparently, there was also individuals that would come through and give Bibles to individuals. And that's what this is showing, missionaries providing Bibles. This reminds me a lot of what we're going through right now in our country. 2,000 men, women, and children remained for 5 days at Ellis Island recently without bunk beds or had to lie on the floor or sit up at night with 6 squeezed together on each bench in 1921. And again, the same situation in a different photograph. Lots of overcrowding. They're immigrants just waiting to be processed. So again, look at all that chain link fence and keeping everyone separate. Here's an interpreter working with a group of immigrants to help explain some of their new customs they'll be exposed to. These young mothers are getting some sunshine on their babies. They know the benefits of vitamin D. Women are considered undesirable, so they're being sent back to their country. And a detention pen where men are also being held back for deportation. I thought this was very interesting to see the circumstances in the men's dormitory as far as their housing and the bunk beds and wash basins. This is for the women and children. So when it comes time to leave Ellis Island, again, you have to be processed. So you have to show your passport, money, answer questions. It's really important for the government. They wanted to know whether or not they were going to be a problem. So they would actually use a chalk and put code marks on their clothing. So they would use abbreviations for LPC was likely to be a public charge. E was eyes. CT was for their trachoma, their eye infection. B for backs. FT for feet. H for heart. L for lameness, PG for pregnancy, X for mental retardation, and S for senility. And if they circled a K, it meant that that person was insane. So as they were moving them through the process, they would have those markings on them. People had the opportunity to purchase a box of lunch so that as they were traveling, they'd have something to eat. And this next picture shows them leaving the facility and carrying their lunch boxes with them. More processing, just, getting your final approval of your entrance papers, waiting to get back on the barge to get on land. Again, luggage. So here's the baggage room at Ellis Island. This happens to be the outgoing mail, but still, it just gives you an idea of what it looked like. People waiting for you, your relatives, waiting to greet you and pick you up. And here's the last area where they go through before they're able to leave, and the kissing gates, where you would meet your relatives or friends. So the one thing that I found was the kissing post. In this area, immigrants were reunited with waiting friends and relatives who had preceded them to America. The emotional and joyous scenes that took place here prompted an Ellis Island matron to write the following in 1910. The manner in which people of different nationalities greet each other after separation of years is one of the interesting studies at the island. The Italian kisses his children, but scarcely speaks to his wife, never embraces or kisses her in public. The Hungarian and the Slavish people put out their arms around each other and weep. The Jew of all countries kisses his wife and children as though he had all the kisses in the world and intending to use them up quick. So again, money had to be exchanged before they left. And then picking up your baggage, looking for your lost baggage. Where is everything? Transportation. So when it comes time to leave Ellis Island, again, sometimes the families would pick them up directly, or they would go by a parked wagon to be able to get to the train depot. Here, again, you can see the tags on the people's clothing as they're entering the ferry to be able to leave. And then sitting at the railway station. So like us, hurry up and wait. So having passed muster with the doctor and the inspector at the nation's gate, it was swung open to these new arrivals, and they're now free in America. Railway station photos. People picking up family members or getting a ride to a rail station. Others may have just walked to their boarding room or walked until they found a place. Back to the fatherland, rejected immigrants awaiting return to their country of origin. Not merely the dangerous elements were refused admissions, but those who for reasons of ill health of mind or body or inability to work are likely to prove a hindrance rather than help. Again, another group waiting to go back. So in quick summary, the dates for Castle Garden were 1855 to 1890. The use of the barge office at Battery Park was between 1890 and 91. And then that gave them the opportunity to get Ellis Island ready. Ellis Island then handled all the immigration from 1892 until 1897 when they had a huge fire. So then they used the barge office at Battery Park again until 1900. And then from 1900 to 1924, Ellis Island was used again for immigration. And one of the statistics that I found said that about 17 million people came through Ellis Island. This was, I thought, a delightful poster that was used back in 1917. And it says, "Food will win the war. You came here seeking freedom. Now you must help to preserve it. Preserve it. Wheat is needed for the Allies waste nothing." My father was a farmer, so I really liked that. This was one graph that I found very old. It was printed in '86, but it shows that in 1910, the immigration really peaked. So the scale goes from 1830 on the far left to 1885 on the far right. So the Maltine Company is the one who provided these quarantine sketches, is what they were called. So they were the ones that took the photos and provided, documented all of this. So here's a relatively current picture of the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. And again, the whole entire quote from Emma Lazarus, but of course the one that we all know is, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." A lot of people probably went, I did read that a lot of people did go back because it wasn't quite the golden door they had expected. So here's a picture of the Great Hall back in the day and a picture more recently of it as a public park area. Again, just more views of the Statue of Liberty. And these two slides, I'm going to go back and forth so you can see. So take a peek at this and now we'll go on. So the contagious disease wards were in the back and the hospitals. You can see the ferry slip in the center, the wall of honor where people can now put brick inscriptions for their family members, the main building, and then way over there in the far top, you can see the ferry terminal and then the baggage and dormitory. So you can see what it looks like without all the narration on it and with. So this is a list of the websites that I found that I got all this information from. I did not create anything myself. I just did a lot of cut and paste and arranging so that we could share this information and be able to have an overview of what both Castle Garden and Ellis Island were like. I did not find any pictures about what it was like in Battery Park. So I'm done with my presentation. I am not, as I said earlier, I'm not an expert. I only researched this for myself. And then after I put so much work into it, I decided I may as well share it with everyone. So I think we should proceed and go into our chat rooms so that everybody can talk about what they've been seeing. So I'll stop the share now. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Paula, there are questions.
Thank you.
Recording is to be ended.